President George W. Bush was famous for a variety of sayings, or what people started to refer to as Bushisms. These Bushisms were, at the same time, imprecise or unconventional statements of sorts, and they would eventually become kind of one of his trademark features. To be fair, anybody who communicates for a living can say things that aren't quite what you meant, were inartful, or did not come out the way that you wanted. So in no way am I judging President Bush here. I understand. One of my favorite ones is the following clip in relation to being asked by the press about the status of Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and the faith President Bush had in Secretary Rumsfeld's leadership and work.
I hear the voices, and I read the front page, and I know the speculation, but I'm the decider.
It is true that at some point decisions have to be made, whether by agreement, by vote, or by an individual position on what the proper course of action is. And as President Bush reminded us, he is, in fact, the decider. Now, ideally, decisions are made based on all of the available information and analysis in a way that is rational and can be explained. This is why we're talking about improving critical thinking. Of course, what is rational can differ when asking different people. This is why we need to try to take the decision based on data analysis, whatever kind of data we have, and incorporating diverse perspectives to arrive at the best decision we can. In other words, we need to use critical thinking. In looking at making a decision, analyzing data, analyzing material in a way that brings us to deciding, one novel approach to data analysis and deciding is known as grounded theory. Grounded theory was developed by sociologists, which is probably why I like it, Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss. And in the process of grounded theory, we are constantly evaluating our research question. We're constantly analyzing the research methods we're using. We're constantly analyzing the questions we're asking. And we're making modifications along the way. This stands in contrast to more traditional methods like the scientific inquiry method, where you start and you go all the way through the project towards the end and come out with your conclusion. In grounded theory, you don't wait till the end to make changes. You make changes as you go to get better information so that you can come out with a better outcome, or in this case, decision. By using such an approach, we can continuously reflect on our analytical process and where it needs improvement. We can see where gaps in information lie. We can see what other kinds of data we might need to collect, what voices might be missing and we need to solicit for their input, and what questions we should be asking overall. If we're even asking the right questions, we're looking at the right thing. Before deciding on an outcome, therefore, we should be deciding on what more is needed so that we can render the best decision possible. So deciding isn't just an outcome, it's part of the entire process. Additionally, in order to arrive at better decisions, we can create environments, we can create cultures of shared and collaborative learning, where people feel free to share their knowledge, their perspectives, their input, and people are looking to learn from one another. One of the chief barriers to creating such an environment is our own ego, or the inability to recognize where we individually might be wrong or not have the right information or expertise to make a decision. Especially if you're in leadership, it can be hard to say, I don't know. And in fact, one of the crucial things a professor mentor of mine told me at one point was, it's okay to tell the students, I don't know. So they own part of the educational process. To create environments of sharing, learning, and critical thinking in order to make better decisions, we need to establish a culture in which people can share and communicate points of view. They have to feel comfortable in doing so, and they have to do so without fearing reprisal or negative judgment. Are people allowed to express themselves and be heard? Can those people express their points of view without immediately being dismissed or feel like they're being negatively judged for bringing up their point of view? And especially, we need to be able to welcome divergent voices as part of the decision-making process to see what they might decide, not just what the group thinks. Something that often happens in quantitative data analysis is that data outliers are removed from the data set because they are too far outside of the mean or the cluster. And as a result, those points of data are not seen as being reliable and or valid. They're seen as being noise, something went wrong to cause them to be so far outside of it. And therefore, we shouldn't let that position affect the rest of the data. And while sometimes the outliers are removed from the data set for good reasons, we also might think of, well, what could we learn from those outliers by looking more closely at them? And in fact, this is more of a qualitative data perspective of exploring the outlier, of digging into what's happening there to really understand if something there is worth knowing and is a key piece of information. In fact, when thinking about critical thinking, orienting to the outlier can be a good way of making sure we are incorporating different and divergent points of view. One way that we can explore the outlier is by assigning someone to play that role that doesn't automatically or naturally exist, then make someone be that person. A colloquial expression for this, at least in American English, is called playing the devil's advocate. Now, this is not to be confused with the movie The Devil's Advocate, though I do hear that's a pretty good movie too.
Was a nice run, Kev. Had to close out someday. Nobody wins them all.
Playing the devil's advocate simply means that someone plays the role of providing a contrary voice and raising alternative points of view. This person's job is primarily to push back on what we think we know and the decision we have arrived at. Their role is to really make us make sure that we're considering everything that we need to consider, that we're taking in all that we need to take in before going forward with whatever decision we're going to make. Thus, we need to have an environment in which decisions, while perhaps ultimately made by the one person in charge, the person with seniority, the person with rank, the person who is the leader in the hierarchy, while that person might make the ultimate decision, like President Bush, we need to make sure that others have the ability to contribute. The following example shows the importance of this approach. Admiral Chester Nimitz came into a pretty rough situation when he took over command of the U.S. naval forces in the Pacific after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The battleship fleet had been decimated. Pearl Harbor was basically in many ways not in commission at the time. And he was thrust into this situation with people looking for immediate results in action. What was he going to do? Rather than rushing to Pearl Harbor to assume command and make a decision, Admiral Nimitz took time to take a train across the country from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, where he would fly to Pearl Harbor, in order to evaluate all the information he had in the situation, as well as to gather his thoughts. And he wasn't alone. He had aides with him as well to help him in this process. And upon arrival, he didn't dismiss those who were in positions of command at Pearl. Everyone who was at Pearl before Pearl Harbor and was involved in the leadership during Pearl Harbor figured their careers were done, that Nimitz would come in, clean house, get rid of everybody. He didn't do that. Rather, he renewed his confidence in them. He also created environments where different positions and points of view could be heard. In fact, Admiral Nimitz created management by walking around. He would walk around, solicit other people's opinions, listening carefully to them, but ultimately making a decision. And as a result of his approach, his leadership style, Admiral Nimitz was able to turn a dire U.S. position around and to reinstill confidence, not only his confidence in the people he was leading, but more importantly, their confidence in themselves. Author Trent Hone described Admiral Nimitz's approach in the following way, quote, Nimitz and his staff fostered this transformation by encouraging effective collaboration between talented individuals, surfacing new opportunities through rapid sense-making, deliberately creating options for future exploitation, and employing a disciplined approach to risk that balanced tactical decisions with strategic objectives. Their efforts allowed Nimitz to rebuild the morale of the Pacific Fleet, win the confidence of his superiors in Washington, seize the initiative from the Japanese, and initiate an offensive in the Central Pacific. Once that offensive was underway, Nimitz and his staff used their skills to maintain and extend unremitting pressure on the Japanese to accelerate their progress and hasten the end of the war. These efforts were crucial to Allied success in the Pacific during World War II. Obviously, ultimately, Admiral Nimitz was the decider. I mean, there was also Admiral King, but Nimitz, for many intents and purposes, was a decider in the Pacific, knowing that he was responsible for command. But in exercising his authority, he never created an environment in which people felt like they couldn't express themselves, and points of view were able to be shared when evaluating options for action. Now, in closing our discussion of being a decider, it also is important that we avoid paralysis through analysis. This expression means that we become immobilized in decision-making because we are constantly analyzing existing information and seeking new information to make sure we're making the right decision. In his book, Paradox of Choice, Barry Schwartz examines how the growing ability to make decisions does not necessarily lead to more happiness. Because we are able to decide more, we feel anxiety over it. We're stressed out. I wish someone would just decide for me. Sometimes making a decision is a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of risk in making the wrong decision. And so we also have to create environments where people feel comfortable in that risk, in making a decision that might be the wrong decision, but for what they are able to show were the right reasons. I have seen this myself in teaching. If I give students choice of what subject to research for a final paper in a class, what sources to use, how many pages to write, what kind of assignment they even turn in, they can become very overwhelmed by that prospect of having to decide and be left with indecision. They think, what if I make the wrong choice? Or what if I don't do what you want me to do? Having a process for making a decision is vital to our critical thinking process, so we do not get caught in this endless loop of paralysis through analysis. And we need to make people comfortable in making decisions and having faith in them if they're able to show through critical thinking why they're making those decisions. And so with making decisions comes the opportunity to choose wrongly. Making the wrong decision can be a major contributor to making no decision, because people don't want to make the wrong decision, so they make no decision. And making no decision isn't necessarily better than choosing a path and learning the outcome. It's probably better to do something wrong and learn and grow than to not do anything at all and stay stagnant. Now, clearly, some decisions have greater repercussions than others, and the wrong decision can literally be disastrous. And so I'm not going to tell you that making the wrong decision is fine in every instance, because clearly, depending upon the outcome, it's not. But even when facing drastic circumstances, we have to be willing to make the wrong decision and learn from it. We have to be able to instill in others their opportunity to make the wrong decision for the right reasons and learn from it. There is not necessarily a perfect decision, and we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Finally, we do always have to keep in mind that sometimes the best decision is, in fact, not to act at all, as long as we know why we're not acting. This is different than making no decision. Rather, we choose to not take action on doing something for good reason. We've thought about it and we've come to that decision. We just have to be able to articulate what those reasons are for not taking action at that time. So, how do we improve our ability to be deciders like President Bush? First, try to use rationality and critical thinking throughout the decision-making process. What factors are driving the decision? Emotion, ego, other people's expectations and demands? Or are decisions being made through a rational process using critical thinking? Second, create environments where open input is allowed and that individuals are able to contribute what they would decide and what they would do if given the opportunity to make the decision. Allow people to share what they would do or what they would do differently or not do at all and why. Third, continuously make decisions about what is needed to make better decisions. Again, deciding is part of the process, not the outcome of the process. Do you have what you need in order to make a decision, or do you need more to help guide you to the decision you need to make? Fourth, communicate your decisions clearly and the reasons for them. My experience, people will respect a leader's decision if they know why that decision was made and there's a rationale behind it. While people might not agree with it, and there are always going to be people that don't agree with it, hopefully they will appreciate the reasons why you reached that decision in the first place. And I should add, if you can't explain your decision to others, perhaps other decisions need to be made, or maybe you need to go back and better understand why you made that decision in the first place. As always, make sure you contribute your own recommendations on becoming the decider and what things you consider as part of your decision-making process. Thanks.